Ned Stark stood at the foot of the Tower of Joy with 6 loyal companions at his back, their swords half-drawn and their faces tight with dread. Opposite them stood 3 Kingsguard knights, Ser Oswell Went, Ser Gerald Hightower, and the one called the Sword of the Morning, Ser Arthur Dayne. The sun was beginning its long descent behind the stark mountains of Dorne, casting the tower's white stones in a wash of gold and deepening shadows across the dusty, rocky ground. A warm wind blew from the desert, carrying the scent of sun-scorched sand and the memory of the war that had consumed the realm. Each side regarded the other in grave silence. They had all shed enough blood. They had all lost dear friends. And yet, here they stood, weapons drawn, prepared to take each other's lives. Ned's heart thundered in his chest. He was young, younger than he felt, for the war and the grief had aged him in ways he could scarcely measure. He thought of his brother, Brandon, who had died at the hands of the Mad King. He thought of his sister, Lyanna, who was rumored to be within the tower walls. He thought of his father, who had also perished in King's Landing. Every reason he had for drawing his sword seemed righteous in his heart, yet he found no comfort in the necessity of more death. Was there no end to the slaughter? He looked into Ser Arthur Dayne's pale eyes, which gleamed with quiet resolve, and saw no malice there, only an unbreakable sense of duty. Ned remembered how the rumors described Arthur Dayne, the deadliest of King Aerys' Kingsguard, the man who had fought beside Prince Rhaegar at the Trident. The stories said he was chivalry incarnate, that he fought with a blade called Dawn, forged from the heart of a fallen star. The man standing before him seemed impossibly regal despite the dust on his white cloak, shining with the last rays of sun that struck the blade at his side. His silence conveyed a kind of sorrow, as though he hated what must be done but would do it all the same. Ser Oswell Went and Ser Gerald Hightower flanked him, equally grave, equally determined to protect what they were meant to protect. The war might be over in the eyes of most, but these knights still clung to their vow. Ned's men, Howland Reed among them, braced themselves for the inevitable. It seemed only a matter of heartbeats before the clash of steel would ring out across the quiet Dornish dusk. But in that heavy silence, something happened within Ned Stark. He remembered Lyanna's smile, the way it lit up her face as she teased him about his solemn nature. He remembered the pain and anguish that had followed him these last months, the incredible loss and heartbreak. He had come here seeking his sister, and yet once more the cost would be blood. His hand trembled on the hilt of his sword. The ghosts of those he loved seemed to whisper in his ear. He took a step forward, raising a hand, not to signal his men to attack, but to hold them back. The men behind him exchanged perplexed glances. They knew what they had come for. They knew the vow Ned had sworn to Robert and to himself, to rescue Lyanna, to end the last vestige of the Targaryen threat. But Ned, in that moment, felt something break inside him. He was so weary of the sword. "I will not fight you," he said softly, the words tumbling from him in a broken exhalation. Even as he spoke, doubt raged in his mind, telling him this was madness, that these Kingsguard knights would cut them all down if they showed weakness. But some deeper part of him, the part that placed honor above pride, guided his actions. Ser Arthur Dayne's eyes narrowed, flicking in confusion. "My Lord Stark?" he asked, his voice carrying the softness of the desert wind. He'd expected a battle, not a parley. Ned swallowed, glancing back at his companions, then returning his gaze to Dayne. "We came to find my sister, not to slay good men. Enough blood has been spilled in this war. I beg you, Ser Arthur, in the name of all we have lost, let us find a better way." Beside Dayne, Ser Gerald Hightower's jaw tightened. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard was an older man, heavy-set, loyal to the Targaryen line until his last breath. His vow was iron. "We have our orders, Lord Stark. This place is not for you. Turn around, or draw your sword." For a moment, Ned could not speak. Then he forced the words out, slow and certain. "You protect someone inside that tower. You protect my sister. I have guessed it, but I must see for myself. If what I fear is true, I must take her away from here. Or if not, I must know why she has been kept apart for so long. Ser Oswell went stood tense, his eyes flicking between Ned's men and the tall figure of Dane. It is no business of yours, Went began. The king. Dane raised a hand in a silent command to hush. The sorrow on his face was profound, and in that moment, Ned suspected everything. That Lyanna was inside, that her condition was dire, and that these knights, sworn to protect Rhaegar's secret, believed they were doing the right thing. Dane's next words came quietly, as if pulled from the depths of his soul. You would spare us if we lay down our arms, Eddard Stark? If we stand aside, let you pass? Could I trust your words? Ned's heart pounded. He did not know if Robert Baratheon would show mercy to any Targaryen loyalists. But perhaps, if the child rumored to be Lyanna's was born, and the truth was more complicated than any man realized, honor could yet be preserved. I give you my word, as Lord of Winterfell. I do not seek your lives. I seek only my sister's safety. If you stand aside now, if you let me take her, I will do all in my power to protect you from retribution. Howland Reed-eyed Ned, uncertain if this sudden mercy might mean their doom. The other 5 men behind Ned stirred, confused and unsettled by this break with the plan. They had come prepared to fight to the death if necessary, for they believed the Targaryen threat must be ended. The hush that fell was thick as tar, laden with the possibility of betrayal on either side. Dane exchanged a look with Hightower and went. The 3 had fought side by side for many years. They had served an oath that seemed unbreakable. To protect their prince's secret, to protect the last hope of the line of the dragon. But it was the question in Dane's face that halted them. Had they not given enough already? It was Arthur Dane who finally answered. I have heard many speak of Ned Stark's honor. I saw the measure of your brother Brandon once. I do not believe you a man who would lie easily. His voice was low, distant. Then he turned to Hightower. My Lord Commander, we cannot stand here forever. If we are all to die Rhaegar's child. He stopped short, as though he had said too much. But Ned heard the name, and everything changed. Rhaegar's child. He had suspected that Lyanna might have borne Rhaegar's child, that this might be the reason she was hidden away. Now the possibility thundered in his mind. Hightower's face grew pale with anger. He had not intended for Ned to hear even a whisper of that secret. But the truth was out, or at least enough of it to confirm Ned's dark suspicions. I will keep the child safe, Ned said, forcing the words to ring with steel. I do not serve the Mad King. The Mad King is dead. If this child is innocent, then I will do what I must to protect him, her, whoever the babe may be. But I must see Lyanna. I must know. Ser Gerald's hand clenched around the hilt of his sword, but Dane looked at him with a gaze that spoke volumes. These men had served together. They had faced Robert's rebels, watched Rhaegar die on the Trident, seen the realm torn asunder. They must have known that further resistance might only lead to the child's destruction. Slowly, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard relented. He exhaled through clenched teeth and nodded to Dane. Ned's men let out shaky breaths, clearly relieved that they would not be forced into a bloodbath against 3 of the greatest knights in the realm. Ned himself felt a weight lift from his chest, though he knew that the real test lay within the tower's walls. He had not used cunning. He had simply told the truth as he believed it. It had nearly broken him, but Arthur Dane's quicksilver eyes told him that chivalry still existed in this world, that perhaps these knights would see sense, if only for the sake of the helpless. And so Ned Stark passed between them, followed closely by Howland Reed, while the other 5 men remained outside with Ser Oswell Went and Ser Gerald Hightower. The White Tower loomed above them, tall and foreboding in the dying daylight. Ned's heart clenched at every step, his hope and fear growing in equal measure. The door of the tower opened silently, revealing a dim interior lit by flickering torches that chased away the gloom. The air inside was cool and carried a scent of herbs and stale straw. Ned's footsteps echoed softly on the stone, and Arthur Dane led him up a narrow, winding stair. On the upper floor, in a small bedchamber, Ned found his sister. Lyanna Stark lay upon a simple bed, pale as morning snow. Her long brown hair clung to her forehead, damp with sweat, and her eyes opened weakly at the sound of footsteps. She saw him and tried to smile, though tears welled in her eyes. "Ned," she whispered, her voice raw, as though she had screamed or wept for hours. Beside her, nestled in blankets, was a small infant with dark hair and the unmistakable look of a Targaryen about his delicate features, though the child also bore something stark in those eyes, a certain somber cast that reminded Ned of his own reflection. Ned's breath caught in his throat. "Lyanna, oh gods!" Ned managed as he hurried to her side, sinking to his knees beside the bed. He took her hand gently, fearing he might hurt her with a careless touch. She was feverish. Her body trembled with exhaustion, or perhaps with the aftershocks of childbirth. The child stirred, letting out a soft whimper, and Lyanna's other hand weakly tried to comfort him. Arthur Dayne stood at the threshold, his face a mask of sorrow. "She has been fighting a fever," he murmured. "We have done all we can, but we are knights, not maesters. The babe was born a fortnight ago." Ned swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Sister," he whispered, pushing sweat-drenched strands of hair from her brow. "We must get you help. A maester, or perhaps the best healer we can find in Dorne. I will get you both away from here. Rest now, I beg you." She clutched at his wrist, the warmth of her hand unnaturally hot. Her eyes filled with desperation. "Promise me, Ned," she gasped. "Promise me you will keep him safe." Ned's world spun. He had known that day would come, the day he learned the truth of Lyanna's disappearance. He had known the rumors, that she and Rhaegar had been lovers or that she had been kidnapped. But seeing the babe beside her, seeing her ravaged by fever, it was all too much. A swirl of loyalty, love, and horror coalesced within him. "I promise," he said, though the words sounded thin to his own ears. She tried to speak again, but a coughing fit overtook her. Ned pressed a water skin to her lips. She drank weakly, then sagged back, panting. Arthur Dayne stepped forward, eyes flicking between Lyanna and the baby. "She's strong," he said softly, though Ned could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "But the fever has gripped her for days." Ned glanced back at the Kingsguard knight, who had in his power the ability to slay them all or turn them away. The idea that the fabled sword of the morning was now waiting on Ned's decision seemed surreal. "We must leave this place," Ned said. "All of us. She needs care and the child needs a future. There is nothing left to guard here but a secret that could mean his death if discovered by the wrong men." Arthur Dayne did not move. He seemed to weigh Ned's words in his heart. "If we leave, we risk the child's life as much as if we stay," Dayne said slowly. "If Robert Baratheon learns that Rhaegar's son," Ned interjected, his voice hardening. "Robert is my friend, but I know him well enough. He hates the Targaryen name. If he learns of this child, no promise of mine could dissuade him from wanting the babe dead. I must keep the boy's parentage hidden. Should you stay at my side, Ser Arthur? You know the cost." Dayne's gaze dropped to the sword at his belt. Dawn gleamed with a strange radiance even in the dimness of the tower. "If I must raise my blade to protect the innocent, I will. But do you truly think you can hide a royal child in the north?" Ned closed his eyes, imagining the cold ramparts of Winterfell. He pictured the weirwood in the Godswood, the heart tree with its solemn, carved face. He remembered the harsh winters that tested every living soul in the north. Perhaps the boy could pass as his own. "There is a way," Ned said at last. "If Lyanna does not recover, or if she cannot speak of the child, I can claim him as my bastard. My wife, Catelyn, may not forgive me easily, but it is the only way to keep Robert and the realm from knowing." Lyanna's eyes fluttered open at that. She mouthed something, but no sound came. Tears streaked her cheeks, for she knew the shame such a claim would bring upon Ned, and the tension it would bring to his new marriage. But if it meant the boy's survival, she would not object. Arthur Dayne's posture shifted, a subtle acceptance of the necessity, though it pained him. "And if word spreads that a dark-haired babe dwells in Winterfell, suspiciously the same age as Rhaegar's child? I will bear that risk," Ned answered firmly. I will do what I must. I will keep him far from the eyes of those who would question it. The north is vast and isolated. With the help of my bannermen, we can conceal this truth for years, long enough for the boy to grow. After that, the gods alone know. The knight said nothing for a long moment. Outside, the desert wind howled softly. At last, Arthur Dane closed his eyes in resignation. My vows were to protect Prince Rhaegar and his kin. If I remain in your service, Lord Stark, I break my vow to the crown as it was. But the crown is gone, no, snatched by the usurper. Perhaps the only vow that matters now is to protect the innocent. If you will have me, I will lend my sword to your cause, though I cannot speak for the others. Ned looked up, startled. You would come north with me? Swear your sword to me. A thin, mirthless smile crossed Dane's lips. I would swear my sword to the memory of Rhaegar and Lyanna, for the child's sake, until he is grown, until he has the strength to forge his own path. Ned felt the enormity of the decision pressing on him from all sides. If he accepted Arthur Dane's loyalty, he risked alarming Robert and the realm. How would he explain the presence of the Sword of the Morning at Winterfell? How would he keep it secret that the legendary Kingsguard knight had lived? But perhaps the threat was less than the alternative. If Dane remained behind, eventually someone would come looking, or Dane's own sense of honor would compel him to carry out an impossible duty. Better he come with Ned, where they might unite in protecting Lyanna and the child. Ned squeezed his sister's hand and watched the sleeping babe. The child's future depended on decisions made in this room, here and now. I will have you, Ned said at last. Your skill is beyond question, Ser Arthur, and your loyalty to the child will be our bond. But I make you no false promises. Robert is a good man in many ways, but in this matter he will not relent. We must guard the secret with our lives. Arthur Dane gave a solemn nod. Then he said, There is still Ser Gerald and Ser Oswell to consider. They will not lightly abandon their vows, nor submit to a Stark. But if the truth is made plain, that our cause is lost, that the only living Targaryen heir rests in this babe, perhaps they will see reason. Ned stood, carefully scooping the infant into his arms so Lyanna could rest more comfortably. The child's eyes fluttered open. They were dark, not the deep purple of the Valyrian line, but something in them reminded Ned of the haunted Targaryen gaze. The boy gave a small, plaintive cry, and Ned rocked him gently, heart seized by a rush of protectiveness. He marveled at how easily an innocent child could become a key in the great Game of Thrones, a game so cruel and vast it had ground all the Seven Kingdoms underfoot. Lyanna watched this, tears still shining in her eyes. You will call him Jon, she whispered, after Jon Arryn, who was like a father to you and Robert. Let him bear a piece of your old friendship in his name. Ned bowed his head, softly repeating the name to himself. Jon. It sounded right, a simple name that might help shield the child from scrutiny. He prayed to the old gods that they would protect him. Very well, Ned said, his voice thick. Jon it shall be. They descended the tower slowly. Howland Reed rushed to Ned's side upon seeing him emerge with the child in his arms and Arthur Dane standing close by. My lord, Reed murmured, eyes wide with confusion. He had expected the savage chaos of a fight, not his lord carrying a babe and a Kingsguard knight at his elbow, apparently allied. Ned cleared his throat and glanced at Ser Oswell Went and Ser Gerald Hightower, who stood near the entrance with anxious expressions. My sister is gravely ill, Ned said softly. She needs help. My men and I will take her to safety. The babe as well. He looked at the Kingsguard, letting his statement hang in the air. Ser Arthur has chosen to join me to protect the child. There need be no more bloodshed. Gerald Hightower's anger was evident in the white-knuckled grip he had on his sword, but Oswell Went looked troubled, torn between loyalty and reason. Eventually, the Lord Commander rumbled. We swore to defend Rhaegar's heir to the last. How can we do that if we entrust him to Stark? Arthur Dane stepped forward, standing beside Ned. I am following the spirit of our vow, if not its letter. The Targaryen cause is lost, my Lord Commander. The throne belongs to Baratheon, yet the child lives. We have a chance to preserve a part of Rhaegar to keep him safe from harm. We cannot accomplish that by raising our swords against all of House Stark. Gerald Hightower's face hardened. If we stand aside, we betray our oath. And if we stand with you, we betray our vow to the crown. Ned spoke quietly. The crown under King Aerys brought ruin to the realm. My friend Robert sits the Iron Throne now, and he is not kindly disposed toward Targaryens. The boy's only chance is anonymity in the north. That is all I ask. He extended his gaze to the older knight, searching for even a flicker of acceptance. At length, Oswell let out a long breath, as if releasing the war and all its terrors in that single exhale. I will not raise my sword against you, Lord Stark, nor will I stand in your way. I have seen enough death. Hightower's shoulders slumped, and he removed his white helm. His hair was thinning, silver with age, and the look in his eyes was haunted. You understand, he said in a low voice, that if we go with you, if we place our swords in your service, there can be no turning back? Ned nodded once, the weight of it pressing into him. There is no turning back either way. The child must be protected. If you would stand aside, I beg you to come with me. If you cannot, go in peace, but say nothing of what you have seen here. A tense silence followed. Outside, Ned's men shifted nervously, unsure whether they stood on the brink of violence or a fragile truce. Finally, Ser Gerald turned to Arthur Dayne, who was like a son to him. The Lord Commander spoke softly. Do you truly believe this is Rhaegar's will? Dayne looked down, sorrow etched into every line of his face. Rhaegar wanted a better world, for his people, for his children. I believe this is how we keep that hope alive. Hightower closed his eyes, inhaled, and nodded. Then I will lay my sword beside yours. Oswell did the same, though it was clear no small part of him feared what this decision would bring. The 3 Kingsguard knights, once the most feared swordsmen in the realm, bowed their heads in solemn unity with Lord Eddard Stark. Ned let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He pressed the child gently into Howland Reed's arms. Get Lyanna, he instructed softly. We ride for Starfall if it's closer than Winterfell. Ser Arthur, is there a maester there who could tend her? Dayne inclined his head. Yes, my sister Ashera resides at Starfall. She will know what to do. Ned was aware of the rumors surrounding Ashera Dayne and certain lords at Harrenhal's tourney, but he set that aside. The important matter now was saving his sister's life, if it could be saved. We go at once, he declared. The group set out from the Tower of Joy under the cover of deepening twilight. No swords were drawn. No blood was spilled. They left behind a symbol of a war that had raged far too long, a crumbling relic in the Dornish wastes. For all the men and one woman at its heart, it felt like a departure from a doomed past into a precarious future. As they traveled through the night, the child Jon barely stirred, exhausted from his newborn trials. Lyanna slept fitfully in a litter constructed hastily by Ned's men. Her fever spiked, and she whispered deliriously, sometimes crying out Rhaegar's name, sometimes murmuring pleas for her child's safety. Ned rode close by, Arthur Dayne at his side. Though once they might have been mortal enemies on the battlefield, now they rode as allies bound by a fragile vow. After many hours of riding, they approached Starfall as the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon. Starfall stood upon a great rock that jutted out of the Torrentine River, its white walls catching the morning sun so that they seemed to glow. Ned felt some measure of hope at the sight, for he knew that help lay within those walls if Arthur Dayne's words proved true. Guards at the gate gaped at the unlikely sight of Eddard Stark, hero of the rebellion, riding with the Kingsguard knight Arthur Dayne. Tension rippled through them, but Dayne's presence quelled any immediate challenge. He led the party inside, swiftly sending for a maester and for his sister, Lady Ashera Dayne. Ashera arrived in a swirl of concern and quick intelligence. She was tall, dark-haired, and beautiful with a commanding presence. When she saw Lyanna's condition, she directed the maester to prepare a room with fresh linens and hot water. Lyanna was carried inside, unconscious, while Ned stood aside, helpless. For all his battle prowess, or so people claimed, he could only watch as his sister's life was entrusted to the skill of strangers. The day passed in a haze. Ned paced the corridors of Starfall, refusing to rest or eat until he had news. Arthur Dayne conferred with his fellow Kingsguard, uncertain how to proceed. Oswell Went and Gerald Hightower kept to themselves in the interim, trusting Arthur's instincts but feeling unmoored from the purpose that had defined them for years. Eventually, as the sun climbed past its zenith, Ashera Dayne emerged from the sickroom. Her face was worn and pale from hours of tending Lyanna. Ned rushed to her side. "My lady, how is she?" Ashera offered a tired but hopeful smile. "Your sister is strong, Lord Stark. The fever is not gone, but we have managed to break its grip somewhat. She rests now. The next few days will be critical, but I believe she has a chance." Relief washed over Ned so powerfully that he nearly sagged against the wall. "Thank you," he breathed. "The child." "He is well," Ashera said gently. "A fine, healthy boy, hungry, often fussing, but that is a good sign of strength." She paused, noticing Ned's inner turmoil. "My brother told me you intend to claim the child as your bastard, to protect him from certain threats." Ned managed a stiff nod. "Yes, for now it's the only way." Ashera studied him for a moment. A flicker of some emotion, perhaps empathy, passed across her face. Then she said, "I will do all I can to help your sister recover. You have my word." The next few days were filled with tension and cautious hope. Ned spent as much time as he could at Lyanna's bedside, speaking to her even when she seemed unconscious, urging her to fight. He held baby John, rocking him awkwardly, marveling at his small hands and his soft, downy hair. Arthur Dayne showed a surprising gentleness with the child, as well. The night of the morning had set aside his Kingsguard cloak, now wearing simpler garments in the colors of House Dayne, though he still carried Dawn at his side. During that time, Ned communicated discreetly with Howland Reed about the men waiting outside Starfall and about how word might reach Robert. He wrote no letters, not yet, unsure of what to tell the newly crowned king. It would be best, he reasoned, if Robert believed that Ned had simply found his sister dead in Dorne and returned alone. But that would mean explaining the presence of Arthur Dayne somehow. Perhaps the easiest solution would be to allow the realm to believe the Sword of the Morning had perished, just as the songs would say he did at the Tower of Joy. Eventually, Lyanna rallied. The fever broke, and her color returned. She opened her eyes to find Ned by her side, cradling the baby. She wept with joy and relief, even as her heart broke anew for Rhaegar and for all that had been lost in the war. She spoke very little, exhausted, but she repeated again and again her gratitude for Ned's mercy to the Kingsguard and her plea that he protect Jon at all costs. Ned assured her he would. "But, Lyanna," he said one afternoon as they sat alone, "what will you do now? Will you remain in the north? Raise him there as—" She shook her head weakly. "I can't. If anyone knew, if Robert discovered, he'd never allow it. It would endanger you, the child, all of us. You know Robert's hatred for the Targaryens has not cooled." Ned bowed his head. "You will not be parted from your son." She managed a small, sad smile. "If it keeps him safe, I must. But not forever. Perhaps, once he's older, I can come north in disguise. I don't know. All I know is that the secret of his parentage must be kept, or Robert will have his head." The weight of that truth settled between them. Ned's jaw clenched with resolve. "Then the story will be this: you died in Dorne. I bore your body home for burial in the crypts of Winterfell. The child will be mine, a product of my dishonor. I hate to do this to you and to Catelyn, but it must be so." Lyanna closed her eyes, tears leaking from beneath her lashes. "Promise me, Ned. Promise me he will be safe. That you'll teach him what honor truly means." Ned bent and kissed her brow. "On my life, I swear it." Within a fortnight, it was deemed that Lyanna was strong enough to travel, but only if she was carried gently. Plans were made with great secrecy. Gerald Hightower, Oswell Went, and Arthur Dayne all agreed that they would ride north with Ned, but under the guise of anonymity. They would abandon their white cloaks, forging new identities for themselves. It was a risky maneuver, one that would require cunning and stealth, but Ned believed it necessary. However, a surprising conversation took place on the eve of their departure. Gerald Hightower sought out Ned in the courtyard of Starfall, where Ned was preparing the horses. The Lord Commander appeared troubled, as though he had wrestled with himself for days. "My Lord Stark," Hightower began quietly, "I have served the Kingsguard since before you were born. I swore my vows before King Jaehaerys II, and I have upheld them through Mad King Aerys' reign and into Rhaegar's time. Perhaps I was a fool, but my vow was my life." Ned studied the older knight, respectful despite their fraught history. "I know this is not easy for you." Hightower let out a humorless chuckle. "Easy? No, but I have thought on what Arthur said. If Rhaegar's dream was for a better realm, then perhaps the crown's passing to Robert Baratheon is not the tragedy we believed. Aerys would have burned the realm to ashes. Rhaegar, though a good man, could not stand against his father's madness in time. Now it falls to you to protect the last of his blood." He paused, looking at his hands. "I will see this through. I have no home to return to, no life but this. If I can ensure the child grows to be a good man, it is worth the cost." Ned bowed his head. "You honor me, my lord. I hope that when the child is grown, we'll look back on this choice and see it was the right one." Gerald Hightower managed a small nod, as if uncertain he would live that long, yet determined all the same. The next morning, under a pale sunrise, the group set forth. Lady Ashera Dane embraced Arthur with tears in her eyes, urging him to return if he could. He promised he would see her again, if the gods permitted. Then, with great care, they assisted Lyanna onto a horse-drawn litter. The child Jon traveled in a sturdy cradle balanced across the litter's seats, and Ned rode near at all times. They passed through the gates of Starfall with minimal fanfare, their party wearing plain clothes. The white-cloaked knights no longer wore their gleaming armor, though they remained armed. The legend of the Tower of Joy would spread soon enough, a rumor that Eddard Stark fought 3 Kingsguard knights to the death. But in truth, the knights lived, and all because Ned Stark had refused to raise his sword. Their journey north was long and fraught with peril. They avoided major roads, traveling through lesser-known passes when possible. There were close calls, patrols of Baratheon soldiers who had come south to ensure there were no lingering Targaryen loyalists. Ned's men bristled at seeing their new traveling companions, men they had once considered mortal enemies, but an uneasy truce prevailed. Howland Reed proved essential, guiding them through marshy lands on secret paths. The Knights of the Morning, or rather the ex-Kingsguard, kept themselves aloof, rarely speaking with the rank and file of Ned's men, who still bore their grudges. But slowly, small bonds began to form, over a shared meal, over a campfire where men told old stories. Lyanna's health ebbed and flowed, and twice Ned feared they would lose her. But the fervent care of the maester from Starfall, who had accompanied them for a time, and the presence of Ashara's healing herbs gave her the strength to continue. She held baby Jon whenever she could, whispering words of love, imprinting herself upon the child's heart for as long as time would allow. They skirted King's Landing, riding west of the city under cover of night. Ned's heart panged at the knowledge that Robert was inside the Red Keep, or perhaps off hunting, wearing the crown. Could he have ever explained to Robert this choice he had made? That he had spared the life of Rhaegar's child? No, Robert would not have understood. The friend he once knew had been consumed by vengeance after losing Lyanna. That man was a good companion for wenching and drinking, for roaring laughter, but not for mercy to Targaryen heirs. At last, they reached the Trident, where the memories of the great battle between Robert and Rhaegar haunted Ned's every step. He heard the ghostly echoes of steel on steel, saw once more the image of Rhaegar falling beneath Robert's warhammer, rubies scattering into the river. Now Ned carried Rhaegar's son, hidden away from the man who had slain him. Fate was cruel indeed. Crossing into the north felt like emerging onto another world. The air grew colder, the forests denser. The men breathed in relief, for now they traveled through lands loyal to House Stark. Here Ned's word was law. Still, they did not throw caution to the wind. Spies existed everywhere, and the precariousness of their secret demanded vigilance. Eventually, the party arrived at the outskirts of Winterfell beneath a slate-gray sky. Ned felt an overwhelming surge of emotion to see his ancestral home after so long a war and so arduous a journey. Smoke curled from the chimneys. The ancient walls rose from the snow-dusted ground. Wolves howled in the distance, a welcome chorus to the returning lord. Yet his relief was tinged with dread. How would he explain Lyanna's survival to Robert? How would he present the child as his own, a child apparently born while he was off at war? And what would his wife, Catelyn Tully Stark, say of it? They entered the courtyard, greeted by the uncertain stares of Winterfell's servants and guards. Word was quickly sent to Catelyn, who emerged with a mixture of joy and anxious curiosity. She ran to Ned, embracing him, only to draw back at the sight of the infant in his arms and the pale, exhausted Lyanna behind him. "You said she was dead?" Catelyn whispered, tears brimming in her eyes as she looked to Ned. He shook his head solemnly. "I was mistaken. She was near death, but by the grace of the gods, she survived." He hesitated, forcing himself to meet Catelyn's gaze. "There is much I must tell you, but not out here in the open." Catelyn glanced at the babe and frowned. "Whose child is this?" Ned set his jaw, feeling the old guilt swirl inside him. "He is mine. I will explain." The shock and betrayal that flickered across Catelyn's face was like a dagger to his heart. But he had prepared himself for this moment. He would bear her anger, her heartbreak, because it was necessary. If the secret were ever to slip that the child was Lyanna and Rhaegar's, Robert would move heaven and earth to see the boy killed. Better that Catelyn, and indeed the entire realm, believed Ned had fathered a bastard during the war. With hushed deliberation, Ned ordered the castle sealed to visitors. The rumor would spread soon enough that Ned Stark had returned with his grievously ill sister and a child rumored to be his own. But for now, he wanted to speak to Catelyn in private, to prepare her for the ruse that must endure. In the solar, before the warmth of a crackling fire, Ned explained the barest outlines of the situation to his wife. He did not speak of Rhaegar. He did not speak of Targaryen blood. He simply said that Lyanna was in grave danger, and the child needed shelter. He asked for Catelyn's mercy and her silence. Tears slid down her cheeks, her face a portrait of wounded pride and heartbreak. Yet she loved Ned enough to hear him out. "If you say this is how it must be, my lord, then I will do my duty. But I will not forget the pain of this day," she said softly, voice trembling. Ned closed his eyes, hating the lie that had cleaved a rift in his marriage. But there was no choice. Duty demanded it. He drew her close, murmuring what comfort he could. Days passed as Lyanna settled into a room near Ned's own, resting under the watchful eye of a maester from Winterfell. Catelyn's presence was gentle but distant. She did not trouble Lyanna with prying questions. Gossip spread through the castle that Lord Stark had returned with a bastard son. Many recalled the scandal of King Robert's many bastards, but to see the honorable Ned Stark likewise compromised was shocking. And so rumors flew. The 3 former Kingsguard knights took on new roles in Winterfell at Ned's behest. Gerald Hightower, aging and grizzled, was presented as a distant cousin from the Vale with nowhere else to go. Oswell Went, whose features were more common and less recognized, might pass as a guard or sworn sword. Arthur Dayne, possessing a distinct and noble bearing, proved harder to disguise. He took the name Sir Arthur Stone for the time being, a man from the Vale or some other corner of the 7 Kingdoms, who had come to serve at Winterfell. Only a few of Ned's closest men knew the truth. Even they spoke little of it, uncertain whether they had done right by the realm or threatened it further. Robert Baratheon, from his seat of power in King's Landing, heard only that Ned Stark had brought his dying sister home for burial, but, by some twist of fate, she lived. The new king sent a terse message of relief for Lyanna's survival, though it was tinged with perplexity. He had believed her dead long before. As for Ned's rumored bastard, Robert found it only mildly scandalous. He laughed in his reply, telling Ned that if he needed help raising the boy, Robert could send a wet nurse or two. He never suspected the babe's true heritage. Perhaps he was too enthralled with the spoils of victory, the feasts, and the new challenges of ruling a war-torn realm. As the weeks turned to months, Lyanna's health improved, and she gradually resumed some measure of strength. Yet she did not appear in public often, fearing someone might notice how the child looked oddly like her. She helped nurse John in private, always with a lingering sorrow in her eyes. She had lost the father of her child, and she lived in forced anonymity within her own ancestral home. At times, she felt like a ghost, drifting through the halls, forced to rely on Ned's stories of how they would keep her son safe. Arthur Dayne, meanwhile, remained a vigilant guardian. He trained with the men of Winterfell, who marveled at his skill, and he kept a watchful eye over Jon whenever possible. He formed a grudging respect for Ned's unyielding sense of honor and recognized that in their hearts, they both wanted only to protect what was precious. If sometimes his heart clenched with the memory of Rhaegar and the might-have-beens of a realm under the Dragon Prince, he kept it to himself and found purpose in his new life. Gerald Hightower spent long hours in the God's Wood, silent and reflective, as though seeking forgiveness from old gods he had never known. Oswell worked diligently in the armory, forging bonds with the blacksmiths and quietly ensuring no rumor of their true identities spread too far. They were men unmoored, but they had chosen this path, to serve and protect the last living link to the Targaryen crown, an innocent babe. Winterfell's cold winds soon gave way to the edge of autumn, and with the changing of the leaves, Lyanna's restlessness grew. She knew that as Jon got older, the risk of discovery increased. People would begin to notice his features. They might remark on the shape of his eyes, the curve of his mouth, the star-like quality that might resemble House Dayne or even the Targaryens. Ned assured her that the North was vast, that no one would suspect a child of such lineage. Yet her fears persisted. One evening, while feeding Jon in her chambers, Lyanna looked up at Ned and said, "When he's old enough to walk, old enough to speak, people will wonder. They'll ask questions. You cannot keep him locked away forever." Ned smiled softly. "We'll raise him among the household. He will be called Jon Snow, my bastard son. The North will accept it. We Starks have always been a private people, and it's no secret that I came home from the war with a boy. By the time anyone might connect the dots, it will be too late." She touched Jon's hair, dark and soft. "He'll grow up never knowing his true heritage," she said, pain in her voice. "That is the cost," Ned said gently, placing a hand over hers, "to keep him safe from Robert's wrath." Lyanna bent over the child, pressing her lips to his brow. "Forgive us, Jon. Forgive us for hiding you from the world. We do this only so that you might live." Tears glistened on her cheeks as she spoke. In the meantime, rumors from the wider realm trickled in. The small folk whispered of Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen, rumored to have fled across the narrow sea. If Robert learned that Targaryen heirs lived, he might eventually turn his gaze outward, seeking their destruction as well. Ned felt the tension of that knowledge like a sword at his throat. If Robert discovered a Targaryen in his own castle, hidden under the name Jon Snow, all the honor in the world would not save them. Arthur Dayne, too, worried about the exiled Targaryens. He never voiced it, but Ned suspected that if Daenerys and Viserys were discovered, Robert's vengeance would be swift and merciless. The realm might once more bleed, yet for now they could do nothing but keep their own charge safe. One day, the child might learn of his blood and face a choice that would shake the very foundations of the Seven Kingdoms. But that day was far off, and no one could know what the future held. Months passed into a year, and a semblance of peace settled over Winterfell. Jon Snow grew into a healthy toddler, doted on by his mother and guarded fiercely by Ned. Lyanna walked the halls more freely. Her color returned, though the hush that followed her spoke of tragedy and secrets. Catelyn regarded her sister-in-law with a careful politeness, suspecting there was more to the story than Ned had revealed, but she did not press. She had seen the weight Ned carried every day and knew better than to pry into a matter that caused him such sorrow. Robert Baratheon visited once, unexpectedly, during a royal progress through the north. Ned's heart nearly stopped at the news. He begged Lyanna to remain secluded and had Ser Arthur, Ser Gerald, and Ser Oswell hide themselves away. Robert arrived in a flurry of boisterous laughter, boar hunts, and drunken revelries. He asked after Lyanna but seemed reluctant to see her, as though the memory of her disappearance still haunted him. He did meet Jon Snow briefly, patting the toddler on the head with rough affection. "He's got your look about him, Ned," Robert joked. "A dour little pup. May the gods save us from more solemn faces." Ned forced a smile, exhaling with relief that Robert saw only a stark bastard in Jon's features. Or perhaps Robert simply refused to see anything else. In time, the king departed, leaving behind a sense of lingering unease. Ned realized that day how precarious their secret truly was. If Robert had looked closer, if he had paid more attention, if he had recognized something of Rhaegar in the boy, there would have been blood. But fortune or the old gods smiled upon them. Robert left with no suspicions, continuing his progress southward. The realm breathed on, never knowing how close it had come to a cataclysmic truth. And so the seasons turned. Ned Stark, weary from war and burdened with a secret that could topple kingdoms, found a measure of solace in the day-to-day responsibilities of ruling the North. He presided over harvest festivals, resolved disputes among his bannermen, and oversaw improvements to the Winterfell library. The three ex-Kingsguard integrated themselves carefully. Arthur Dayne became the quiet shadow of the courtyard, a master swordsman who taught some of the younger guards a style of swordplay they had never seen. Gerald Hightower and Oswell did likewise, each finding small roles in the household, never drawing too much attention to themselves. Lyanna, after much deliberation, chose to stay in Winterfell at least for a time. She could not bear to be parted from Jon just yet, and the North was her home. She took solace in visits to the Godswood, singing soft lullabies to Jon beneath the heart tree. Sometimes she spoke to Ned of Rhaegar, and the grief in her eyes made him want to tear his hair out. But he comforted her as best he could, reminding her that the legacy of the man she loved lived on in Jon. Catelyn, torn between her sense of loyalty and the sting of Ned's supposed infidelity, kept her misgivings to herself. Over time, she learned to care for Jon in her own guarded way, though her heart never quite softened entirely. She bore Ned children of her own soon enough. Robb, then Sansa, then Arya, each one a joy that helped her heal from the blow of Ned's bastard. The children were all raised together in Winterfell's halls, forming bonds that would shape their destinies, though Jon's place always remained somewhat apart. One night, as the snows began to fall in earnest, Ned found himself walking along the battlements with Arthur Dayne. They looked out over the white expanse of the courtyard, where the wind bit with the promise of a harsh winter to come. "Do you ever regret not fighting me at the tower?" Dayne asked quietly, his breath steaming in the cold air. Ned was silent for a long moment. "Every day, I think of what might have happened if I had. My men would be dead or yours would. Lyanna might have died of fever, and Jon might have perished too. The realm would have gone on, never knowing any different. But some part of me believes we chose the right path. A harder one, but right." Dayne nodded, his gaze distant. "I see Rhaegar in the boy sometimes. Pains me, but I am grateful he lives. I never told you this, but Prince Rhaegar once confided in me his belief that a child of his would help save the realm from a great darkness. Maybe it was prophecy, maybe just his dream, but I choose to believe we have given that dream a chance to breathe." Ned's eyes flicked over to Dayne, curiosity and a hint of disquiet stirring. "A great darkness?" Dayne gave a small shrug, half a smile. "Prophecies can be riddles. Perhaps the threat of the White Walkers or something else. Who can say? But Rhaegar believed in it, enough to risk everything." Ned pressed his lips together. He had grown up on stories of the Long Night, of ancient evils in the far north. Perhaps it was all children's tales, or perhaps it was something that lingered in the bones of the world. Either way, he felt an odd stirring of hope. If Jon was truly meant for some grand purpose, so be it. "I only pray the day never comes when he must face such a thing," Ned said finally, clasping his hands behind his back. Dayne let out a breath. "Yes, Let the boy have a normal childhood, for as long as the gods allow. They stood there a while longer, two men bound by a secret that could destroy kingdoms, yet oddly united in a cause that transcended petty politics. Far below, in the quiet of the Godswood, Lyanna Stark walked hand in hand with baby Jon, showing him how to touch the old weirwood tree without fear, to giggle at the faces carved in its trunk. Snow drifted down, dusting mother and child, and Jon looked up with wide, curious eyes. The heart tree, silent as ever, seemed to watch them. The old gods bore witness, as they had from the beginning, to the choices men made in pursuit of love, honor, and duty. Time would tell whether those choices would lead to salvation or ruin. For now, under the gray skies and swirling snow, Ned Stark refused to regret the moment he had sheathed his sword at the Tower of Joy and reached out instead with mercy. So began a new tapestry of secrets, alliances, and fragile hopes. A tapestry on which the boy called Jon Snow might one day trace his destiny, unaware that he was born a prince in secret, spared by a choice that defied the relentless gears of war. The winds of Winterfell howled through the courtyards in the weeks following Robert Baratheon's visit, a reminder that the North was slowly succumbing to the deepening chill of autumn. Ned Stark could feel a tightening in the air, a sense of fragile peace that might at any moment shatter. The secret of Jon's parentage hung over him like a boulder perched on a narrow ledge. He went about his duties resolutely, tending to affairs of state, overseeing the household, and smoothing tensions between old bannermen and the three former Kingsguard knights who had settled, as quietly as shadows, within the walls of House Stark. Arthur Dayne, Gerald Hightower, and Oswell went all understood that their presence was a precarious arrangement, mutually beneficial yet fraught with danger. Their skill as warriors was beyond reproach, but Ned could not simply present them openly at feasts or let them mingle too freely. The realm believed them dead, slain at the Tower of Joy by Ned and his companions. If anyone recognized their faces, or if word reached the wrong ears in King's Landing, it would unleash a storm of questions. And so Ned found ways to tuck them away in tasks that kept them from prying eyes. Gerald Hightower, older than the others, was content to serve in the background, advising on martial matters and occasionally sparring with the castle guard behind closed doors. Oswell went helped in the forge or oversaw inventory of weapons and armor. Arthur Dayne proved the hardest to hide, for whenever he stepped into a practice yard, men stopped to stare at the uncanny grace with which he handled a blade. Many of the guards whispered that the man called Ser Arthur Stone must be some fallen knight of great renown. They did not suspect the truth. Few dared speak the name Dayne, for everyone knew the Sword of the Morning had supposedly perished in Dorne. In the midst of this uneasy routine, Lyanna Stark and her son Jon remained at the heart of Ned's concerns. Lyanna had regained enough strength to walk unaided, though she often drifted into the Godswood, lost in her own thoughts. The counsel of the Maester, who believed her sadness might hinder her full recovery, was to keep her engaged and hopeful. Yet Lyanna's eyes carried a weight of sorrow that no one could dispel. Some days, she would sit by the window in her chambers, gazing over the battlements at the vast northern landscape, the forest stretching away under the bleak sky, holding her child close and murmuring lullabies that spoke of a warmer land, of tourneys and dragon princes. On other days, she tried to busy herself with tasks around the castle, helping the steward or assisting with sewing circles, and always she kept half her attention on Jon. The boy grew rapidly. Winterfell's servants whispered that there was something watchful about him, even in infancy. His eyes were dark, large, and full of quiet curiosity. At times, people saw flashes of Ned Stark in him, an echo of Ned's solemn demeanor. Other times, they noticed a flicker of a different lineage altogether, a certain refinement in his features. Yet, in the swirl of daily life, few had time or desire to dwell on such things. A bastard child was hardly worth rumor compared to the weight of harvest concerns, the shift of power in King's Landing, and the many small crises that beset a great stronghold. And to Ned's relief, no one suspected that Jon might be more than he appeared. Still, Catelyn Tully Stark found it difficult to banish her suspicions. She could not entirely accept that Jon was her husband's child by another woman, not when Lyanna was so fiercely protective. In Catelyn's mind, there was some unspoken bond connecting Lyanna, Arthur Stone, and the boy. But Ned, though gentle in every other regard, firmly refused to say more. Love for Ned and a sense of duty to her new family eventually silenced her questions. She bore her own children in the following years, Robb, then Sansa, then Arya, and she focused her energies on them, along with the ever-growing demands of managing Winterfell by Ned's side. Yet she never forgot the day Ned returned with that quiet baby in his arms, nor the shadows in Lyanna's face when she held him. As time rolled on, the realm inched toward a semblance of stability under Robert Baratheon's reign. The rebellious houses that had supported the Targaryens were subdued, and many lords bent the knee to the new king. Whispers persisted, however, that Viserys and Daenerys lived across the narrow sea, under the protection of loyalists who dreamed of a return to power. Robert's fury at the mere mention of them remained unabated, and he often threatened to send assassins across the seas to finish the last of the Dragonspawn. But he was counseled by Jon Arryn, his hand, to focus on rebuilding the kingdom rather than chasing phantoms across the water. So Robert busied himself with feasts, tours of his realm, and the pleasures of victory. Meanwhile, the seeds of discontent, or so the rumors went, were sown in secret corners of Essos. Ned Stark paid careful attention to these developments whenever ravens brought news. He dreaded the day Robert might learn that a Targaryen child was hidden in his oldest friend's castle. Lyanna and Arthur Dayne felt that fear even more keenly. There were occasional remarks from the three Kingsguard knights that perhaps they should flee further north or even cross the Shivering Sea to disappear in the east. But Ned always persuaded them to stay. It would be no easy thing to ensure Lyanna's welfare in some foreign land, nor to raise Jon in safety without the protection of Winterfell. Here, at least, Ned held dominion. Here, his word was law. And so they remained, forging new routines year by year. When Jon was old enough to walk and speak, he toddled about the courtyards, a curious child who loved the company of the hounds in the kennels and often followed Robb, slightly older by mere moons, wherever he went. The two boys formed an immediate bond, as children do when raised side by side. Catelyn found it disconcerting at first, but over time, she saw no harm in them playing together, and Robb himself never questioned why Jon was called Snow instead of Stark. They were too young to comprehend the significance of names. Sansa was born soon after and joined them in the nursery, a bright-eyed babe who made even the sternest men in Winterfell smile. Lyanna, fearful that Robert or some southern lord might eventually visit Winterfell again, kept mostly to the background of castle life. Yet she was always present at mealtimes, sitting quietly near Ned and Catelyn. She spoke little, ate less, but Ned thought it was important that she show herself as a living presence. Let no one say that she had perished in Dorne. That might raise old questions. It was enough that the realm believed she had been near death after Rhaegar's captivity, and that Ned had miraculously saved her. Indeed, some southern lords had woven it into an epic rumor. The gallant Ned Stark, racing across war-torn lands to rescue his beloved sister from the clutches of the Targaryens. The truth was far more complicated, of course, but the illusions of heroism suited the legends that had sprouted from Robert's rebellion. Over time, the men of Winterfell adjusted to the presence of three strangers in their midst. They knew them as men from distant corners of the realm who had fought in the war, presumably on the side of the rebels. If any recognized a flicker of Ser Gerald Hightower or Ser Oswell Wentz face from old royal processions, none dared voice it. Perhaps the illusions men create to keep the peace are stronger than they appear. In small ways, Arthur, Gerald, and Oswell contributed to the welfare of Winterfell. They helped train new recruits, tended to the armor, and offered wise if discreet counsel on matters of war and peace. Ned, in turn, kept them safe. He asked only that they remember why they were there, to protect Jon and to keep the secret of his parentage buried. As the years went on, the realm faced new upheavals. One of the most significant was the Greyjoy Rebellion. Balon Greyjoy of the Iron Islands declared himself king of the Isles and the North, launching raids against the coastal regions of the North and the Westerlands. King Robert responded with fury, calling his banners to put down the rebellion swiftly. Ned Stark answered the call, leaving Winterfell for a time to muster his northern bannermen. The year was harsh, the seas storm-tossed, but Ned and his host sailed for Pike to join Robert, Stannis, and the other loyal lords in quelling Balon's ambitions. During this campaign, Ned was once again parted from his family. He left Winterfell under the stewardship of Maester Luwin and Ser Roderick Castle. Lyanna, fearful for her brother's safety but aware of her own precarious position, kept herself as unobtrusive as possible. Arthur Dayne also remained behind, disguised under his assumed name, to continue his quiet guardianship over Jon. Gerald Hightower, older and less spry, stayed in Winterfell as well, while Oswell went quietly accompanied Ned's host under an assumed identity. Oswell had always been adept at infiltration and espionage. Ned found it useful to have at least one of the former Kingsguard with him, a man he trusted with the complexities of war and the secrecy of their arrangement. The Greyjoy rebellion burned hot but brief. Robert Baratheon led a devastating assault, and Pike fell under the combined might of the Iron Throne's forces. Balon Greyjoy bent the knee once more, and his younger son Theon was taken as a ward by Ned Stark. This was King Robert's final stroke against the Iron Islands, a means to keep Balon in check by holding Theon as a hostage, ensuring the Greyjoys would not rise again. Ned, who had little love for such a practice, accepted the boy but resolved to raise him honorably in Winterfell. It was, in its own way, an echo of the arrangement that had once bound Ned to Jon Arryn during the war against the Mad King. When Ned returned from the Pike campaign, battered but victorious, Winterfell welcomed him with open arms. Jon Snow, now a boy of 3 or 4, raced across the courtyard to hug Ned's legs, calling him father with a delighted grin. Robb, just a little older, did the same, tackling his father with a child's unbridled glee. Ned ruffled their hair, smiling wearily. He embraced Catelyn, who had Arya, still a babe swaddled in wool, cradled in her arms. Then he turned to see Lyanna standing back, holding Jon's hand. Her eyes shone with tears she tried to conceal. She murmured her relief and gratitude that Ned was home safe. Yet Ned could not help but notice the new wariness in her face when she looked at Theon Greyjoy, who came riding into Winterfell behind Ned. The boy was sullen, not much older than Robb, forced from his home as a hostage. Lyanna worried how the new addition to the household might complicate their already delicate situation. Theon was old enough to remember details, old enough to become suspicious. But Ned reassured her that Theon would know nothing of Targaryens or secrets. He was just a child torn from his father's castle. In time, Theon settled in among the rest of the children, forging a reluctant camaraderie that would shape them all in the years to come. Life resumed a semblance of normalcy, if such a word could be applied to the tapestry of hidden truths and tenuous allegiances woven into Winterfell's daily affairs. Jon Snow and Robb grew side by side, with Theon close behind, while Sansa grew into a sweet-natured girl known for her courtesy, and Arya showed signs of restlessness and wildness from the moment she learned to walk. Lyanna doted on Jon but kept a maternal eye on Arya as well, finding the girl's fierce spirit a welcome reminder that Stark blood ran hot and bold despite the North's chill. She saw in Arya a flicker of herself, an echo of the willful, spirited girl she had once been, riding in the tourney grounds and capturing hearts. And perhaps she also saw a path not taken, a glimpse of a freedom she had lost. Meanwhile, Arthur Dayne grew more comfortable in the north. He sparred regularly with Roderick Castle, who marveled at the man's skill. The Master-at-Arms often teased Ned, "You've got a real champion in Ser Stone. He could match Jaime Lannister from what I see." Ned would only respond with a measured nod and a half-smile, offering no further details. Occasionally, when the yard cleared at dusk, Arthur would spar with Ned or with Oswell Went. Gerald Hightower would watch from the sidelines, arms folded, a faint gleam of longing in his old eyes. Each time dawn flashed in the torchlight, Arthur could never truly part from that blade. Ned's heart clenched. Dawn was a relic of House Dayne, said to be forged from the heart of a fallen star. It glimmered like pale milk glass, ghostly in the gloom. It was a sword that demanded reverence. On those nights, as Ned observed Arthur's effortless mastery, He remembered that day at the Tower of Joy when he had chosen peace over conflict. He remembered how close they had come to butchery in the name of misguided vows. Instead, they had forged a hidden alliance, one that now shaped every hour of their lives. There were times Ned wished it had all been simpler, that Rhaegar had never taken Lyanna, that Robert's rebellion had never been necessary, that children like Jon would not be forced to live under a false identity. But there was no undoing the past. He could only guard the future. Over the years, as Jon grew tall and sturdy, a certain tension arose. The boy wanted to join in the same training as his siblings and Theon. He began lessons at the practice yard, learning the rudiments of swordplay with sticks, then wooden swords. Ser Rodrik taught them all, though he often turned a curious eye to Jon, remarking that the bastard child had a natural dexterity beyond what he expected. Ned watched carefully, sometimes turning away when he caught a glimpse of Arthur Dayne on the sidelines, observing the boy with an expression of wistful pride. Lyanna never came to those lessons. Her presence might raise questions. Why would Lord Stark's sister show such keen interest in his bastard's training? So she stayed away, but Ned knew her heart fluttered with every bruise Jon earned and every small triumph he secured. When the boys turned 8 and 9, Ned decided they were old enough for their first hunts in the forests surrounding Winterfell. He took them out in a small party, along with a handful of trusted guards and no one else. Robb brimmed with excitement. Theon tried to hide his nerves behind bravado. Jon was silent, determined, his eyes flicking back to Ned for reassurance. By then, Ned had come to love the boy as a son in truth, no matter the secret of his birth. He knelt to tighten Jon's boot lacings and said quietly, "Show patience, keep your eyes open. The forest can be as unforgiving as any battlefield." Jon nodded with wide-eyed solemnity, absorbing every word. Robb, of course, teased him for being so grave, but Jon took it in stride. They rode out into the whispering pines, hunting hare or perhaps a doe if fortune allowed. Ned allowed each boy a chance to draw a small bow under the watchful gaze of the guards. Robb missed his shot. Theon managed only to scare the animal. But Jon's arrow flew true, striking a hare. The stunned hush among the guards spoke volumes. The boy shot as though guided by some preternatural sense, though it could have been luck. Still, Ned sensed that Arthur had passed on more than just a warrior's blood. Something in Jon's lineage gave him a calm readiness beyond his years. They returned to Winterfell with the spoils of their hunt. Lyanna, waiting in the courtyard, offered Jon a proud smile, though she said nothing else in front of the others. That evening, Ned joined her for a quiet conversation by the Godswood, a place where they often met to speak freely while the heart tree loomed above, listening with carved eyes. Lyanna's voice held a soft tremor as she recounted the story she'd heard. That Jon's arrow had flown so precisely it silenced the men around him. She laughed nervously. "He's so young, Ned. Sometimes I worry what might happen if he draws too much attention to himself. Word travels, and you know how Robert's court is always buzzing with rumors." Ned nodded, glancing up at the weirwood's face. "I won't stifle his talents, Lya. He deserves to learn and grow, but I'll do everything in my power to keep him safe. Robert rarely ventures this far north, and if he does, I'll ensure Jon is out of sight if necessary." Lyanna's gaze dropped to the grass, her hair spilling around her face in dark waves. "I hate that he must hide. Sometimes I wonder if we made the right choice. Should we have fled across the sea? Let him grow among strangers, never worried about a slip of the tongue? But I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you, of leaving home." Ned set a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm glad you stayed," he said, voice low. "We've built a life here, even if it's not what any of us expected. Jon will have family and a future. There's more hope in that than any other path I can imagine." Lyanna slowly reached up and covered Ned's hand with her own. "I pray you're right, brother, for all our sakes." Seasons turned. Each year brought new changes and challenges to the north. The harvest might fail in one corner of the domain, requiring Ned to coordinate shipments of grain from another corner. A savage storm might wash out bridges or block the roads with snow, yet life continued, steady as the turning of the earth. Robert, from his seat in King's Landing, grew content with his hunts and tourneys, fathering numerous bastards of his own. He seldom traveled north anymore. His ruling style was laissez-faire, leaving much to his small council. Jon Arryn kept the wheels of governance turning, though now and again, Ned would receive a raven from King's Landing complaining of some new extravagance or frustration. He would shake his head, read the letter by candlelight, then burn it. It was safer that way. No one in the north needed to see the king's rants. Ned had enough secrets. Meanwhile, the children reached their teenage years, forging deeper bonds. Robb became the natural leader among them, though Jon often seemed his equal in skill and judgment. Theon maintained a brash exterior, teasing Jon for his bastard status, though there was rarely real cruelty in it, more an assertion of Theon's own pride. Bran was born, followed by Rickon, adding to the chaos of the growing Stark family. Lyanna tried to keep a maternal presence in Jon's life without overshadowing Ned's paternal role. And as for the three cloaked knights who had once served the Targaryens, they continued their quiet vigilance. Gerald Hightower's hair thinned to white, and he walked with a cane now, but his eyes were still sharp. Oswell had taken to traveling between Winterfell and small outposts in the north, sometimes gathering intelligence or simply giving himself space to breathe away from the castle's watchful eyes. Arthur Dayne grew older as well. Lines appeared at the corners of his eyes, but he remained a peerless swordsman, quick and fluid, as though guided by an otherworldly grace. From time to time, Arthur and Lyanna would speak late into the night in the library tower, reminiscing over memories of Rhaegar. It was a quiet sorrow they shared, the knowledge that Jon would never know his father's face, never hear his voice. Occasionally, Arthur would recite a line from the songs Rhaegar had once sung or a memory of how the prince spoke of prophecy. Lyanna would grow teary-eyed, and Arthur would gently place a hand on her shoulder. "He was a good man," Arthur would say softly, as if trying to reassure both of them. "I know he brought much sorrow to your house, but he loved you, and he believed in the child you bore." Lyanna could only nod, her voice catching in her throat. She still wore the half-broken shell of the girl who once ran laughing through Winterfell's corridors, a rose in her hair. Now she was a woman tempered by tragedy, living in the hush of secrecy. Yet she found some small measure of comfort in these talks, in Arthur's unyielding devotion to Rhaegar's memory and to Jon's future. When Jon reached the age of 12, Ned noticed a shift in him. The boy had always been quiet, but now he seemed haunted by questions he could not articulate. He would watch as Ned embraced Robb or addressed him as "my heir," and Ned saw a flicker of hurt pass through Jon's eyes. The boy understood, however dimly, that he was on the outside looking in. Despite Ned's attempts to treat him equally, the truth of his bastardy weighed on him. And so, one evening, Jon came to Ned's solar, a place lined with shelves of old scrolls and tapestries, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. "Father," Jon said, standing by the doorway. He wore a simple tunic of brown wool, hand-me-downs from Robb. "May I speak with you?" Ned looked up from the ledger he was reviewing. He recognized the tension in Jon's stance, the clenched fists at his side. He set the quill down. "Of course, Jon. Sit." Jon came forward and sat stiffly, glancing at the fire as though gathering courage. I wondered if you would allow me to join the Night's Watch when I'm older." The request took Ned aback. He studied Jon's face, searching for the reasons behind it. "Why would you want that?" Jon's voice wavered. "I know I'm a bastard, Father. I see the way people look at me, the way Mother, Lady Catelyn, tries to be kind but can't forget what I am. Robb is your heir, and rightly so. Bran and Rickon and the girls, each of them has a place in the family. I have no place except maybe to serve the Watch." Ned felt a stabbing in his chest. He had never realized quite how deeply this sense of exclusion had taken root in Jon's heart. He reached out and set a hand on Jon's shoulder. "The Watch is an honorable calling," he said carefully, "but it is a life's oath. You're still young. There is time to decide your path, Jon. You needn't give up everything else so soon." Jon's eyes flicked up, hopeful yet pained. "But there's nothing for me here, is there? I'm not a Stark. I'm just... You are my son, Ned said firmly, gripping Jon's shoulder. And I will not have you believe otherwise, no matter what others say. You have worth beyond a black cloak. Jon was silent for a long moment. The logs in the fireplace cracked, sending sparks up the chimney. Finally, Jon nodded, swallowing hard. If you say so, father. In truth, Ned did not know how to answer the boy's deeper question. Jon was of royal blood, yet they had to hide him as a bastard. It was a cruelty that wounded Ned every day, but any alternative would risk the entire family. He resolved to speak with Lyanna, to see if she might reassure Jon in a way that Ned could not. That night, after Jon had gone, Ned sought Lyanna in her chambers. He found her sitting on the window seat, a candle flickering at her side. She was staring out into the dark, the moon illuminating the snow-covered courtyard below. Ned told her of Jon's desire to join the Night's Watch. Tears glistened in her eyes as she listened. He can't do that, she whispered, voice tight. He's God's. He's not meant to live a celibate life on the wall. He's meant for something greater. Rhaegar believed. Ned knelt before her, taking her hands. You know I don't put much stock in prophecy, Lyanna, but I agree he shouldn't abandon his future just yet. We have to find a way to show him he is loved here. She squeezed his hands, her voice trembling. Loved, yes, but not recognized. Not truly. How can he grow into his destiny if he thinks he's just a bastard with no claim on anything or anyone? Ned closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. We have no choice, sister. Robert still rules the realm, and if he knew, you know what would happen. I cannot risk the bloodshed that would follow. Not just for us, but for everyone in these lands. There are still men who revere House Targaryen. War would break out again. Lyanna bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. I know, she said, her voice small, but it breaks my heart. We're crippling him with our lies. Ned stroked her hand gently. I'll talk to him again. Perhaps we can find him some sense of purpose here. Let him learn from Ser Rodrik, from Arthur Sairstone. If he grows confident in his skills, he might not see the Watch as his only option. Lyanna nodded, though sorrow still lay heavy in her eyes. Thank you, Ned. In the weeks that followed, Ned approached Arthur Dayne discreetly and asked if he might take Jon under his tutelage. Arthur agreed at once, eager to guide Rhaegar's son more directly. And so, in the quiet hours of early morning, before the castle stirred with daily business, Jon would slip out of the barracks and into a secluded courtyard where Arthur waited with 2 wooden practice swords. At first, Jon was shy, uncertain. He knew Ser Stone was an exceptional swordsman, but the man was quiet, distant, and rarely spoke more than a few words to him. Yet, as they began to spar, something changed. Arthur's movements were fluid, almost dance-like. He showed Jon how to balance his weight, how to move lightly but strike decisively. You have a gift, Jon, Arthur said softly after the first session. You may not see it, but it's there. Jon stared up at the older knight, breathing hard. His hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. Why do you say that? Arthur studied him with a faint smile. Because I've trained many young men, and few have your natural instincts. You sense how your opponent will move and you adapt. It's a rare thing. Jon flushed with a mixture of pride and confusion. Thank you, sir. I enjoy the sword. It's the one thing that makes me feel capable. Arthur nodded, handing Jon a water skin. A sword's a powerful tool, but it won't fill all the empty places in your heart. Remember that. You must decide for yourself who you are, not let the world do it for you. Jon drank deeply, pondering the words. He had never had a mentor like this. Ser Rodrik was good, but he was older, more rigid. Arthur Stone moved with a grace that hinted at something extraordinary. Jon found himself wanting to impress this man, to live up to the potential Ser Stone seemed to see in him. So he devoted himself to the lessons, rising before dawn each day. Arthur, for his part, felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was not simply waiting in Winterfell, hiding from the realm's gaze. He was helping Rhaegar's son learn the skills of knighthood, albeit behind closed doors. There were moments when he saw in Jon's features a fleeting image of Rhaegar, that same intensity of focus, the same unspoken yearning for acceptance. At such times, Arthur's heart clenched with longing for the friend he had lost and for the better world they might have built. But he kept his sorrow hidden behind a reserved smile, channeling it into patient instruction. Word of Jon's blossoming talent spread quietly through the guards. Some scoffed that a bastard could never truly match a highborn knight, but others recognized that Jon had an uncanny knack for the sword and bow alike. Ned watched from afar, careful not to draw attention, relieved that Jon seemed happier. Lyanna, too, allowed herself a small measure of hope, though she still wrestled with guilt whenever she saw Jon's face. In these years, the rest of House Stark's children followed their own paths. Robb learned the duties of a young heir, forging alliances with the great Northern Bannermen and training in leadership under Ned's guidance. Sansa delighted in songs, stories, and courtly graces, dreaming of the southern courts she had never seen. Arya, forever restless, disliked needlework and courtly manners, preferring to roam Winterfell with a wooden sword, practicing with the castle guard whenever she could. Bran, still very young, climbed every wall and tower he could find, fearless to the point of danger. Rickon remained a babe, doted on by the entire household. And Theon Greyjoy, older by a few years, stood between them, sometimes a friend, sometimes a rival, always grappling with the fact that he was a hostage, not truly a son. Yet, over time, he had found a kinship with Robb and Jon, forging brotherly bonds that he found both comforting and painful. Thus did life at Winterfell continue, a tapestry of small triumphs, quiet heartbreaks, and unspoken tensions. The realm outside might suspect little of the drama unfolding within these old gray walls. King's Landing, in particular, was occupied with other matters: court intrigues, the Lannisters' rising influence, the whispers of a Targaryen girl somewhere across the sea growing into womanhood. Occasionally, Robert would dispatch a messenger demanding Ned's presence at a tournament or council meeting. Often Ned declined, citing the difficulties of traveling from the distant north. Other times, he made the journey south alone, leaving Winterfell in the hands of Ser Rodrik, Maester Luwin, and quietly Ser Gerald Hightower, whose counsel he had come to trust. Lyanna never accompanied him. She could not risk someone at court recognizing her face from the war's final days, or from the time of Rhaegar's rumored romance. As Jon turned 14, his skill with the sword became undeniable. Arthur Dayne decided it was time to push him further. Early one morning, before the sun had fully risen, Arthur and Jon met in the courtyard with wooden practice swords. They began as they always did, with gentle parries and footwork. Then Arthur's strikes came faster, forcing Jon to react swiftly. Jon met every blow, sweat flying, the clack of wood echoing against the stone walls. Arthur pressed harder, unleashing a flurry of attacks that would have overwhelmed most boys of Jon's age. Yet Jon's reflexes kept him alive in that flurry. He did not cower or panic. He adapted, stepping aside at the last moment, turning a desperate block into a riposte. Suddenly Arthur shifted his angle, bringing the wooden sword down in a diagonal slash. Jon twisted away, but Arthur's blade caught him on the shoulder with a sharp crack. Jon stumbled, pain flashing across his face. He fell to one knee, the wind driven from his lungs. Arthur lowered his sword, panting, his expression troubled. "Are you hurt?" Jon grit his teeth, clutching his shoulder. "It's nothing," he said, though tears of frustration gleamed in his eyes. "I almost had you. I know I did." Arthur knelt, placing a hand on Jon's uninjured shoulder. "You did very well, better than any squire your age I've seen. But don't let pride cloud your judgment. Even the best knights can fall to an unexpected angle of attack. Remember that." Jon exhaled, nodding, and wiped his brow. "Yes, sir." They both rose, standing in the first light of dawn. Arthur studied Jon's face, taking note of the determination mixed with sadness. "Are you truly happy training here in secret?" Jon hesitated. "It's the only way. I know I can never be a true knight. Bastards aren't anointed." Arthur's gaze flicked away for a moment. "Once, He might have recited all the reasons a boy of royal blood belonged in shining armor before the entire realm. Now he could only offer a gentle sigh. You can still live by a knight's code, even if you never take the vows. Chivalry is in the heart, not in ceremony. Jon absorbed these words, then nodded. I won't forget, he murmured. He flexed his shoulder gingerly. It's just bruised. Arthur nodded. We'll take a break for a few days. Let you heal properly. They parted ways, Arthur heading toward the armory, Jon back to the main keep. Unbeknownst to them, Lyanna watched from a window above, her face lined with worry. She could sense Jon's internal strife, a longing for something more than the half-life he led. She resolved to speak with Ned again soon, to see if there might be any better path for her son. That chance arrived sooner than expected. A raven arrived from King's Landing, summoning Ned to court once more. Robert desired the company of his old friend at a grand feast celebrating some alliance or victory Ned scarcely cared to learn about. Yet ignoring a royal summons was unwise, so Ned prepared to travel. This time, however, he decided to bring a small retinue, including Robb and Jon, so they might see something of the wider realm beyond the north. He reasoned that by passing Jon off as his bastard squire, he would not attract undue suspicion. Indeed, many high lords traveled with bastard sons in their trains. It might even inure the boy to the realities of a divided society. Bastards walked a precarious path among the nobility. Lyanna was horrified at first. You can't bring him to King's Landing. What if Robert recognizes something? What if the Lannisters? The Queen is said to be cunning and suspicious. Ned placed a reassuring hand on Lyanna's arm. He'll only be a face among many. Robert sees 1,000 people a day. Cersei Lannister has no reason to pay him any mind. Many lords have bastards. Jon will wear the colors of House Stark in a lesser fashion. And he's old enough to pass for a squire. Lyanna still worried, but she saw that Ned was determined. She also recognized that Jon had grown restless, yearning to see more of the world. Perhaps letting him venture south under Ned's protection would show him that his life could extend beyond the walls of Winterfell. So she reluctantly agreed, extracting a promise from Ned to keep Jon as far from Robert's direct scrutiny as possible. And so the day came when Ned, Robb, Jon, Theon, and a small group of guards set forth from Winterfell. Arthur Dayne did not accompany them. His face was far too risky to expose. Gerald Hightower and Oswell remained behind as well. Lyanna stood on the ramparts, waving farewell, her expression pinched. She tried to keep her composure as the procession disappeared into the distant hills. Jon rode with nervous excitement, a new sword at his hip, a gift from Ned. Robb, meanwhile, looked forward to seeing the fabled capital of the Seven Kingdoms, the place of kings and councils. Theon boasted he would find some amusement in the brothels, if Ned gave him any liberty. Ned only scowled at that. The journey south was long, punctuated by the transition from the cold forests of the north to the green and rolling plains of the Riverlands. They crossed the Neck, passing through Moat Cailin, where the marshy bogs gave way to broader lands. Jon marveled at the sight of so many towns, so many people living beyond the horizon of Winterfell's domain. At night, Ned would quiz the boys on the history of the places they passed, telling them stories of ancient battles and alliances. Jon listened intently, absorbing the lore as though it were nourishment. They arrived in the Riverlands, stopping at the Twins, the seat of House Frey. Old Walder Frey received them with grudging courtesy, eyeing Jon curiously. "So this is the famous bastard, is it?" he croaked, squinting at the boy. Ned stiffened but did not deny it. Walder chortled. "Well, you Starks breed true, I suppose. Perhaps the boy will be more mannerly than his father, eh?" He cackled at his own wit, and Ned forced a polite smile, unwilling to provoke the notoriously prickly old lord. Robb and Jon exchanged glances, neither daring to respond. From there, they continued on, passing the Trident where Robert had once slain Prince Rhaegar. Jon felt a strange stirring in his chest at the mention of that name, though he knew nothing of its true significance. He only felt a tug of curiosity. Rhaegar Targaryen, the man who had supposedly kidnapped Lyanna Stark, father to no living child. Ned pressed on, eager to avoid lingering memories of that dreadful day. At last, they reached the Crownlands and the sprawling city of King's Landing. John had never seen so many people in one place, nor so many buildings of stone and timber stacked haphazardly along winding streets. The smell hit him first, a rancid mix of sewage, sweat, and tanneries. The city walls were impressive in their size, but within them, chaos reigned. Beggars, merchants, soldiers, and nobles jostled shoulder to shoulder. Rob wrinkled his nose. Theon scoffed that the famed capital was little more than a crowded sty. But Ned instructed them to keep their voices low. King's Landing had ears everywhere. They made their way to the Red Keep, a great fortress of red stone perched atop a hill overlooking Blackwater Bay. Gold cloaks admitted them after Ned presented his seal. Servants bustled forward to stable their horses and guide them to their quarters. Over the next few hours, Ned was swept up in protocol. Formal greetings with the Master of Protocol, an audience with Robert if the king was not too drunk or too busy hunting, and the arrangement of rooms for his retinue. He found it draining, but he endured, for his sense of duty to the crown and his desire to protect the North's interests outweighed his distaste for courtly pomp. John felt entirely out of his depth, trailing behind Ned and Rob in the Red Keep's corridors. The walls were hung with tapestries of Targaryen kings in their pomp, dragons weaving through skies ablaze with color. He stared at those images, feeling a strange pang. Theon teased him, "Wishing you had a dragon to ride?" John shook his head, muttering something about the cruelty of the Mad King, but inside, he felt an inexplicable pull toward the swirling shapes of dragon wings. Eventually, they were ushered into the throne room, where Robert Baratheon presided in his usual state, half-slumped on the Iron Throne, swirling a goblet of wine. Queen Cersei stood by his side, radiant in her emerald gown, her green eyes flicking with bored calculation over the newcomers. She offered Ned a perfunctory smile. "Lord Stark," she said, "we are pleased you could attend." Robert heaved himself up with a grin. "Ned," he boomed, beckoning him closer. "It's been too long, my old friend." He looked heavier than before, the flesh of his face ruddy with broken veins. Yet his presence was still formidable, a man who had once wielded a warhammer to slay Rhaegar Targaryen. "And who are these pups?" he asked, squinting at Rob, John, and Theon. Ned introduced them. Robb Stark, his eldest son and heir, Theon Greyjoy, his ward, and Jon Snow, his squire. Robert barely glanced at Theon or Robb, his eyes snapping to Jon. "A Snow, is it? A bastard of yours, Ned?" His tone was jovial, but there was an edge of curiosity. Ned kept his face carefully neutral. "I, from the war," he said, echoing the old lie. "He shows promise with the sword, so I've brought him to see the realm beyond the north." Robert chuckled, draining his goblet. "I remember when we were that young, Ned, full of piss and dreams." He eyed Jon again, then shrugged. "Well, welcome to King's Landing, boy. Watch your step or the city will swallow you whole." Cersei regarded Jon with a cool gaze, her lips pursed, but she said nothing. Robert quickly grew bored of such formalities and dismissed them, commanding Ned to join him for a hunt in a few days' time. Ned bowed stiffly, leading the boys out of the throne room. As they walked away, Theon whispered, "That was the king? He's fatter than I expected." Robb shushed him, shooting a wary glance at the gold cloaks around them. Jon said nothing. He felt unsettled, as if Robert's gaze had lingered a heartbeat too long, but perhaps that was only his imagination. That night, they attended a lavish feast in the Great Hall. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted boar, spiced sausages, honey-glazed duck, fresh loaves of bread. Servants dashed back and forth with wine jugs, refilling goblets almost as soon as they were emptied. Musicians played lively tunes, and jugglers performed tricks between courses. Jon felt overwhelmed by the noise and color. Robb, enthralled, devoured everything on his plate and chatted happily with a neighboring squire. Theon cast leering looks at any serving girl who passed by, waggling his brows suggestively. Ned sipped his wine in moderation, answering Robert's boisterous conversation with polite smiles. Nearby, the Queen spoke softly with her brother, Jaime Lannister, who wore the white cloak of the King's Guard with an easy arrogance. Jon's attention was drawn to Jaime's golden hair and striking features, which earned him the name the Kingslayer, though Jon did not recall precisely why. He only knew that Jaime had killed the Mad King. But the man's green eyes flicked across the hall without much interest, a slight smirk on his lips. Jon had the distinct impression that everyone in that room was playing a game, one he did not yet know how to join or avoid. Eventually, Jon excused himself and stepped out onto a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The evening air was cooler there, carrying the tang of salt water. Torches along the walls cast flickering light on the balcony's stone floor, and he breathed deeply, trying to steady the whirl of his thoughts. This was the seat of power for the Seven Kingdoms, the heart of the realm, where the king who had killed Rhaegar Targaryen held court. Never knowing Rhaegar's son stood only a few yards away, Jon wondered if this was truly his destiny, to hover at the edges of greatness, unseen and unacknowledged, until the day he died. He leaned over the balcony's edge, watching the moonlight dance on the waters below. A voice behind him said, "Enjoying the view?" Jon turned to see a man in fine silks, with a pointed beard and cunning eyes. It was Petyr Baelish, the master of coin, though Jon did not know his name or title. He merely saw a nobleman with a sly smile. "It's very different from Winterfell," Jon said cautiously. Baelish moved closer, glancing over the side. "Indeed, everything about King's Landing is different from the north. Warmer, dirtier, and far more dangerous in its own subtle ways." He looked Jon over with a mild smirk. "Lord Stark's bastard, is it?" "Jon Snow." Jon swallowed, nodding. "Aye, my lord." Baelish's eyes flicked with interest. "So serious for one so young. I imagine the north is a good teacher of seriousness, with those long winters." He leaned on the balcony rail. "Careful, or you might find yourself entangled in the capital's many intrigues. Rumors have a way of devouring a man's reputation here." Jon frowned, uncertain of Baelish's meaning. "I'm just here to squire for Lord Stark and learn what I can." Baelish's smile sharpened. "Of course, see that you do. The less attention you draw, the safer you'll be." He bowed with mocking politeness and walked away, leaving Jon more uneasy than before. The days that followed passed in a haze of court appearances, hunts, and feasts. Ned kept Jon mostly out of the limelight, assigning him menial tasks that would keep him busy without calling attention. Robb joined tourney melees alongside other young squires, earning a few bruises and the respect of older knights. Jon watched from the sidelines, itching to test himself, but knowing it was better not to stand out. Theon, for his part, spent late nights with other rowdy young men of the court, returning bleary-eyed and hungover. Ned scolded him, but Theon shrugged it off with youthful arrogance. To Ned's relief, Robert seemed not to pay Jon any mind beyond an occasional passing look or grunt of recognition. Cersei, on the other hand, cast cold glances at Jon. If she suspected anything, she did not reveal it in words, but her gaze made Jon's skin prickle. He instinctively lowered his eyes whenever she passed, sensing an almost predatory air about her. He guessed she disliked bastards, or perhaps she simply disliked anything associated with Ned Stark, given that the Queen's father, Tywin Lannister, was rumored to resent the North's autonomy. One afternoon, as Jon was returning from an errand for Ned, he found the hallway near the Royal Solar blocked by a towering figure in white armor. It was Jaime Lannister standing watch. The Kingslayer regarded Jon with open curiosity, a half-smile curling his lip. "You're Stark's bastard, aren't you?" he said, his voice echoing slightly inside his ornate helm. Jon paused, heart pounding. "Yes, sir. I'm carrying a message for my Lord Father." Jaime leaned against the wall, regarding Jon with an amused, lazy stare. "He has you running errands, does he? Let me guess. A letter about grain shipments or some such dire matter of state." Jon said nothing, uncertain how to respond. Jaime continued with a laugh. "Don't look so fearful, boy. I only want to see if you have the Stark stiffness." Some do, some don't. He cocked his head. They say you're handy with a sword. Have you tested yourself in a tourney yet? John's cheeks heated. No, sir. I'm not ready for that. Jaime chuckled. Nonsense. Tourneys are for showing off. Let the realm see who you are. But if you'd prefer to skulk in the shadows, that's your choice. He pushed away from the wall. Be sure to keep your father's messages safe, Snow. If they fall into the wrong hands, all sorts of trouble can brew in this viper's nest we call a court. With that, Jaime strolled away, his white cloak billowing behind him, leaving Jon feeling more unsettled than ever. By the time a fortnight had passed, Ned was more than eager to return to the north. He had done his duty, attended the feast, reinforced his friendship with Robert, sat through council sessions where Pycelle droned on about taxes and Stannis glowered in silence. Ned found the capital as distasteful as ever, but at least no suspicion seemed to have fallen on Jon. On the contrary, the boy had simply blended in among the myriad squires, overshadowed by Robb's more visible presence. Ned took that as a success. Yet, on the morning of their planned departure, a complication arose. Varys, the master of whisperers, requested a private audience with Ned. The eunuch was known for his uncanny knowledge of secrets, a fact that made Ned wary. He met Varys in a small chamber in Maegor's Holdfast, bringing only Robb and Jon as a show of informal guard. But Varys insisted that the conversation be between him and Ned alone. Ned, after a moment's hesitation, told the boys to wait outside. Jon exchanged a glance with Robb, then followed him out, leaving Ned with the spider. Varys bowed low. My Lord Stark, I hope you found your time in King's Landing enjoyable. His voice was smooth, his face unreadable. I'd call it tolerable, Ned replied. What do you want, Lord Varys? Varys's hands folded into his voluminous sleeves. Simply to pass along a small piece of information that might concern you. I've heard a curious rumor from beyond the Narrow Sea, word that Viserys Targaryen might be seeking an alliance with the Dothraki horse lords. Ned's gaze sharpened. And why would that concern me in particular? Varys's smile was placid. Because Robert might decide it concerns you if word spreads of a living Targaryen threat. The king has a certain mania when it comes to Targaryens. I only wish to warn you that the court may soon fix its attention on anything and anyone even remotely linked to the dragon blood. Ned's jaw tightened. Are you implying something about me or my family? Not at all, Varys said smoothly, though his eyes gleamed. I only caution you to be watchful. King Robert may call upon the North to march if rumors of a Targaryen incursion grow too loud. And perhaps there are other rumors. After all, the realm is vast, and some secrets slip through the cracks. Ned scowled. If you have something to say it plainly. Varys lowered his gaze demurely. A whisper reached my ears, faint and unconfirmed, that certain knights thought dead in Dorne might be living under false names. Surely just a flight of fancy. Yet, if it were true and the reason for their survival was to protect some Targaryen interest, well, King Robert would not be pleased. The chamber seemed to grow colder. Ned clenched his fists at his sides, carefully schooling his face to neutrality. As you say, that sounds like a flight of fancy indeed. Varys offered a half-smile. Of course, I merely wished to share my concerns. We both serve the realm in our own ways, do we not? Best for you to leave King's Landing swiftly, before idle tongues spin more tales. Ned regarded the eunuch with undisguised mistrust. And why warn me? Varys shrugged. I have no wish to see the realm plunged into more chaos. War is bad for business and for small folk. If a rumor can be snuffed out before it grows, all the better. He bowed again. Fare you well, my Lord Stark. Ned left that meeting with knots in his stomach. Outside, he collected Robb and Jon, who eyed him curiously. He said only that they were leaving immediately. He made polite farewells to Robert, citing pressing matters in the north. The king, half drunk, waved him off with a genial slur. Cersei watched with narrowed eyes, but did not protest. Within hours, Ned and his party rode out of the city gates, galloping northward as though the others were on their heels. Jon sensed Ned's tension and tried to ask what had happened, but Ned rebuffed him gently. "Only that the sooner we're home, the safer we'll be," Ned said. "Stay alert on the road, and say nothing of what transpired here." They rode hard, crossing the Trident within a week, pushing their horses to the brink. When they finally reached Winterfell, Lyanna was there to greet them, her relief evident in the tears that sprang to her eyes at the sight of Jon unharmed. Ned dismounted, embraced her briefly, then ordered the gates shut. He sent ravens to the nearby castles, quietly instructing them to remain watchful for any visitors from the south. If Varys had caught wind of the truth, it meant others might as well. Late that night, Ned convened a secret gathering in the Great Hall. Present were Lyanna, Arthur Dayne, Gerald Hightower, Oswell Whent, and Howland Reed, who had visited Winterfell for reasons of his own. The hall was dimly lit by torches, the long shadows flickering across the stone walls. Ned stood at the head of the table, speaking in a hushed but urgent tone. "Varys knows something," Ned said. "He may suspect that the Kingsguard knights who vanished at the Tower of Joy are here." He also spoke of Viserys Targaryen forging alliances across the sea. Robert's hatred of Targaryens remains as fierce as ever. Arthur Dayne leaned forward. "Then our time here grows more dangerous. If Robert turns his gaze on us, if he sends men north, we cannot hide forever." Lyanna's face was stricken. "What do we do?" Ned's voice was grave. "I see two options. We reinforce our secrecy, remain behind these walls, and hope the rumors die away. Or, if the Targaryen threat grows, Robert may call on me to march. And if I refuse, we face suspicion." Gerald Hightower's voice rumbled with the weight of years. "Would you truly fight for Robert against Viserys or Daenerys Targaryen? Knowing what you know of Jon's blood," Ned looked away, pained. "If it prevented a war in the north, I don't know. My duty is to protect my people. And Jon is among them, but he can't risk discovery. If we go to war, the chaos might reveal everything." Oswell Whent shook his head. "We cannot fight Targaryens on one side and protect a Targaryen here on the other. It's madness." Howland Reed, who had remained silent thus far, finally spoke in a soft voice. "Perhaps we must consider that Jon might be the hope for peace rather than war. If Viserys and Daenerys believe themselves alone in the world, they may gather forces, strike at Robert in vengeance. But if one day they learn that another of their line survives, raised by a man of honor, perhaps an alliance could be forged. That day may be far off, but it offers a different path than endless bloodshed." A hush settled. Ned closed his eyes, the enormity of it pressing on him. "We are dancing on the edge of a sword," he murmured. "One misstep, and it all comes crashing down." Lyanna stood, her voice quavering. "Whatever we do, promise me we won't sacrifice Jon. Even if it means sending him away. I can't bear to lose him, Ned." Ned took her hand. "No one will sacrifice Jon. We've kept him safe this long. We'll continue to do so, by whatever means necessary." He glanced at Arthur, Gerald, and Oswell. "We stand together on this." The three former Kingsguard knights exchanged solemn nods. They had lived as exiles in Winterfell for years, all to protect Rhaegar's son. This was their vow now, beyond any old oath to a mad king. They would do what they must. Howland Reed placed his hand upon the table, saying quietly, "The Crannogmen are with you, Lord Stark, whatever the future brings." After that meeting, Ned slipped away to the Godswood alone, heart heavy. He knelt before the heart tree, the ancient face carved in the white bark seeming to watch him with quiet understanding. He recalled the day he had first seen Jon in Lyanna's arms at the Tower of Joy, recalling how close he had come to drawing steel against Arthur Dayne instead of offering peace. Every choice since then had been a step down a narrowing path. He prayed to the old gods for guidance, for the strength to protect his family from the storm he sensed was coming. The wind rustled the red leaves overhead, as though whispering secrets beyond mortal ken. In the moons that followed, life in Winterfell continued much as before, though an undercurrent of tension lingered. Jon resumed his training with Arthur Dayne at dawn, devoting himself to the sword with renewed intensity. Robb became increasingly involved in the day-to-day operations of the castle, learning how to command men and settle disputes. The younger children grew rapidly, each displaying their own quirks and talents. Lyanna maintained her vigilance, always checking the courtyard to ensure no southern envoy had arrived unexpectedly. Ned sent out discreet feelers among his bannermen, inquiring about any talk of Targaryen sympathies in the north. He heard almost nothing. His people remembered well the iron rule of the Mad King and had little love for dragons. Yet Ned feared the threat of Robert's wrath more than Targaryen fire at this juncture. If Robert's mistrust flared, he might send a legion of gold cloaks or worse, ask Tywin Lannister to lead an inquest into the rumors. Ned did not know how he would respond if that day came. He only prayed it never would. Far away, across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen wed Khal Drogo of the Dothraki, though few in Westeros knew of it at the time. Viserys dreamed of regaining his father's throne, forging deals that might bring hordes of mounted warriors across the narrow sea. Such tidings seeped into the Red Keep by way of spies and travelers, stoking King Robert's desire to eradicate the Targaryen line once and for all. Yet none of them suspected that the line ran quietly in the north, hidden in the person of a boy called Jon Snow. Thus the realm moved closer to an uncertain future, each player in the great game ignorant of the keystone resting behind Winterfell's walls. And through it all, Jon grew into a young man of compassion and strength, shaped by Ned Stark's honor, Lyanna Stark's love, and the silent watchfulness of the three Kingsguard who had once knelt at Rhaegar Targaryen's feet. When he prayed at the Heart Tree, Jon felt something stirring within him, an echo of a destiny not yet revealed. He did not know that the hopes of House Targaryen, House Stark, and perhaps all the 7 kingdoms rested upon his shoulders, held aloft by a father's devotion and a mother's unwavering heart. If ever the day came when war knocked on the gates of Winterfell or dragons soared once more across the sky, Jon would stand at a crossroads he never asked to face, with the blood of ice and fire in his veins. For now, though, he remained a bastard boy with a wooden sword at dawn, forging his path step by cautious step, unaware how brightly the invisible star of his lineage shone in the darkness ahead. And Ned Stark, haunted by the ghosts of the Tower of Joy, could only keep his vigil, praying that his refusal to shed blood so many years before would, in the end, spare the realm from an even greater carnage. The old gods, carved and silent, bore witness, leaving men to shape their fates upon the anvil of history.